Well, welcome one and all to Bike Racing Without Mercy. And ahead of the Mallorca 312, I'm here with Adam Isherwood at Oxford's Physiology Sports Laboratory to check out where exactly is my anaerobic threshold and VO2 max, and then undertake a longer test to establish how my body performs at the prescribed threshold. I can't say, Adam, but I'm looking forward to the test because it's a 3-minute ramp, power increasing by 25 watts every 3 minutes until I max out. What do you think to that?
Yeah, it's a frog slowly boiling in water, but it's a good one. You know, you get to really push yourself to the maximum. You get some really nice data out of it. We'll be collecting all your expired gas data whilst we're doing it, so it'll give us a really nice idea of where your physiological thresholds sit.
Love that. I'll be your amphibian drowning in a vat of boiling water in order to prepare for the 312. And do check out Murray at All Things Ride. He's got about 10 places left if you want to take up his amazing offer. £550 Wednesday to Sunday, half board and guaranteed entry into the 312. Really looking forward to it. It's going to be a beautiful race. Time, I think, to get on with the amphibian in boiling water.
Let's do it. Halfway through the 275 step. Looking really good, keep it going. Just concentrate on a nice, smooth, steady cadence. Five seconds, jumping up to 300 watts. Really into the meat of it now. It's really good, keep it going. Oops, that's halfway through 300 watts. All looking really good. Got some really nice data coming out of this already. Cadence is sitting perfectly with 91, 92, it's great. Oops, just jumped up to 325. Really good, so stay on top of that cadence. That's good stuff, really working now. It's really good stuff, so that's a minute into the 325 watt step, 2 minutes left of this step. Okay, so jumping up to 350 in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and up. Yeah, that's really good. Good anticipation there. Gives us a minute through 350, so 2 minutes left at 350. Keep it going. It's really good stuff. That's halfway through 350. Really nice. Okay, 1 minute left at 350. Really good, keep it cadence nice and high. Done. Free breathe.
Oh. One boiled frog on the deck. 1 minute longer at 350. Boy, did I have to dig deep for that. Hurry, Adam. Ramp test done and dusted, and the preliminary results are in. VT1 is up from 204 watts to 229. And basically, from the gas exhaled, there's an inflection point between the oxygen and the CO2 where Adam can ascertain where the lactate in the body is no longer being broken down and dealt with in the muscles, and it gets into the bloodstream. And so tell us a bit more about the VT1, Adam.
It'll sit in the middle of your kind of conventional zone 2, where there's kind of an onset of a tangible increase in blood lactate above baseline. So your muscles are continually producing lactate, but usually it's dealt with internally. Above this VT1, this is where the muscle can no longer kind of deal with this lactate itself, and therefore it starts exporting out into the bloodstream, so other non-exercising muscles and your liver and other organs can then use this lactate, because it is itself actually quite a handy fuel substrate itself.
Who'd have thought it? The old lactate, a handy little fuel source, eh?
Yeah, I mean, lactate, yeah, it's the classical ugly duckling of metabolism. Everyone just thought it was a useless byproduct.
Adam clearly likes his pond dwellers, ugly duckling,
yeah.
frogs, all that kind of
nice
stuff.
The analogies.
Pond skaters kicking around. Oh, sorry. Anyway, carry on.
Yes, this kind of gives you an indication of where you're kind of getting a tangible increase in the anaerobic metabolism going on. It's still your body's still more than able to mitigate against it and buffer against it, but this is where you're going from zone 1, lower zone 2, like proper all day energy, into ones where your body's starting to work a little bit harder, and your muscles aren't able to basically maintain homeostasis in themselves. They're having to recruit other organs to help them out. So this is a good indication of effectively your all day power. If you're going to go for a long training ride, something like that, this is a threshold that's really useful to have.
So I'm super happy with that. You know, the actual increase from 204 to 229 watts on my VT1 is an indication of my endurance fitness improving. Super handy, of course, for the 312, and I felt it being coming on a fair bit during the Nodder training camp in Tenerife. Tell us a little bit about my VT2, which I think has gone up a little bit to 277 watts preliminary.
Yeah, so again, and this is we're going to do a kind of confirmatory test now as well to look at it. So we got this with just expired gases, just because of the way we've done it with the VO2 Max test. So we're now going to kind of dive down and get a greater resolution around this threshold and do it with lactates as well. This VT2 is the gas exchange version of threshold. So it's basically what FTP is looking for, it's what critical power is looking for. These are all kind of metrics of this threshold, and it's effectively the maximal power that you can output and maintain a metabolic steady state. So in this instance, you kind of have elevated VO2, you're using more oxygen because you're working hard. You have elevated lactates, the pH in your muscle might have dropped a bit, but all these measures will actually hit a plateau, and then they'll stay in their elevated or their decreased levels respectively. Whereas above this power, you're then dipping into your kind of anaerobic fuel tank, as it were. You won't be able to maintain
the glycogen in the muscles. That kind of thing,
yeah. So at that point you'll get like a real kind of heavy amount of anaerobic glycolysis going on, and your body's not able to buffer against that with any kind of aerobic capacity, because you've maximised your aerobic capacity basically. And at that point, you're depending on how far above the threshold you are, you're then going towards exhaustion. You're never going to hit a steady state. Because
we've got a limited amount of kind of energy or fuel reserves available that enables us to work above our anaerobic threshold.
Yeah. So this is where this is a really useful metric. So it's conventionally you do a 20-minute FTP test. That's a slightly limited one because 20 minutes doesn't really mean much physiologically. What you're looking for here is the delineation between what's deemed in physiological terms the heavy and the severe intensity domain, i.e. one where you can maintain a steady state and one where you cannot. Because above it, you're burning through what's deemed as W prime, and then you're burning through your anaerobic reserves until you get to exhaustion. Below it, the determinants of fatigue are much different, so it's actually that then comes down to things like muscle glycogen and thermoregulatory drift, and even neuromuscular fatigue. So actually your neurons effectively get quite tired and they don't want to drive the muscles anymore. Yeah, so in terms of performance, this is a really important metric, because it ends up being, so for a 10-mile time trial, you tend to sit just above this threshold. For a 25-mile, you tend to sit just below it. This is a power you can hold between 20 minutes to 40 minutes, depending on how fit you are as an athlete.
So where was the VO2 max?
So you can see here that VO2 has been rising, and then actually you can see it would coincide with an increase in the power requirement. But and basically what's happened here is it's gone up and up and up, and then it's plateaued. And it actually plateaus before you come to exhaustion, because you're then actually sat at your VO2 max, so you're still extracting that maximum amount of oxygen from the air into your circulatory system and then down into your muscles. But you're then just, at that point, any excess workload that your body's trying to mitigate against, so the power you're having to put out through the pedals is then being taken up purely by what anaerobic reserves you have left. So by that point, you're on borrowed time, you're burning through just the remainder of this W prime, this anaerobic reserve, and then you come to exhaustion.
And the W prime, this is glycogen, is it ATP in the muscles?
Yeah. So it's and it's a phosphocreatine system as well.
At certain points of intensity, i.e. lower intensity, the body is able to keep recycling, resetting, replenishing. But as you come through these various different thresholds, i.e. VT2 and above,
the body becomes ever less able to kind of replenish, and you've got limited time above that VT2, that anaerobic threshold, and depending on how far you go above it, depends on how quickly you drain down these reserves, and then you get this point where you can no longer recycle.
This is happening on top of your body using its aerobic engine at an absolute maximal capacity, which is why you're getting this plateau rather than just getting to a maximum point and stopping. You get to it and you can sit there for 30 seconds, even longer for some people. At this point you maxed out everything, you're draining the tank fully, and then at a certain point you just have to stop.
So this ramp test, basically you're going through that, the aerobic system's got to a max, the anaerobic system, the glycolysis, has got to the max, and then the ATP, the phosphate create system, is no longer able to replenish, and you've got 45 seconds donation kindly, cashing checks that you cannot afford, energy checks you cannot afford, and then it's game over.
Yeah, and then you either stop, or you have to drop down back below this anaerobic threshold, so down to a level where you've actually got spare capacity of aerobic metabolism to then start breaking down these byproducts and effectively trying to reset the system. Or, as tends to be the case with a max test, you just stop and you're dead, because
the I want my mummy point. So where did that come in terms of the power for me?
So this came at 350 watts. I think you were about, I can't remember how far you got through. I think
two and a bit minutes.
So
let's not forget the bit.
So the way we set this up is to establish the VO2 primarily, so the actual metabolic underpinning of it. So the power ends up being a little bit of a and this is a bit of a misnomer with performance testing, is the idea of a VO2 max power is actually to a large extent determined by the protocol you use for the test in the first place. So if you've got a very sharp ramp rate that's jumping really quickly up and up and up.
I mean, every minute or so,
and by big.
Like this Zwift ramp test.
Yes. Don't get me started on the Zwift ramp test.
Do not get him started on the Zwift ramp test. FYI, the 75% is arbitrary. You heard that here first. That bike racing without mercy.
Oh yeah, God, that's a whole video in of itself.
It is
so the idea of this VO2 max power is obviously one, it's determined by your physical capacities in the first instance, but it's also determined by how quickly you're burning, how quickly you start going above this threshold. If you're jumping by 50 watts every minute, you're going to get to a higher power than if you're going by 5 watts every 5 minutes.
Yeah, that makes sense, because this 3 minute, this ramp test with increments of 25 watts every 3 minutes is a lot harder than those increments every minute. It's surprisingly harder.
Because the thing, you've gone above this threshold, you have this set kilojoule value, and
the doubly prime.
Yeah, exactly. And you're burning through a set amount of energy. A watt is a joule per minute. Joule per second, sorry. And therefore you're just timesing that wattage by the duration. You're getting out a joule value. So if you're going, for longer, you're just going to be burning more joules. It's out of a set.
So the more important point is the measure here, 4.0. Tell us what this 4.0 means.
3.95. Yeah. So this is your VO2 peak. This is the maximum amount of oxygen your body is able to extract per minute. Per minute. It's come out as 3.9 litres, which is pretty high. The way this is generally normalised for comparison across kind of different athletes, so light to heavy, is it's then divided by your body weight. So in this instance, Phil's come out as having a millilitres per minute per kilo. So you just divide it by the kilograms of 61, which is up there. That's what you'd expect for a well-trained cyclist, as we probably deem it in physiological terms. That's a pretty big capacity to have as well.
So this is the point. The power is the power. It can vary according to the testing protocol, how quickly the power ramps up, 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute, 5 minute, whatever. But this is the physiology. We're going to do another test. It's a slightly longer test, but it's really, Adam, you explain.
Yeah, so if we jump back to this VT2, this has given us a good idea of roughly where Phil's threshold sits. So where his critical power might be, where his FTP might be.
And remind us what those numbers were again. So
So we're looking at, this is coming out as 277 watts.
For the VT2, the anaerobic threshold, yeah.
So, but this is based purely on gas data. So we want to, we already want to be able to get a closer look, a greater resolution and a high confidence idea of where Phil's threshold sits for a long climb or a time trial effort, basically. So this one, we're actually going to focus in on this threshold, and we're basically do a much more extended step interval around this number with lactates as well, so we can see basically what's the maximal power he's sat at an elevated but sustainable lactate, so one that's not continually rising, and then find the power above that where the lactate does continually rise, and then we'll know that his threshold, his lactate turn point, or his maximal lactate steady state is sitting between those two values, and then we can kind of put this together and put it together with data we've seen out on the road, and then he'll have a much better idea physiologically of where his threshold is, and therefore what his kind of highest sustainable power is. So that's what we're going to do.
So this test doesn't sound quite as painful.
It's
tell me it's not quite as painful.
This is you're not going to an absolute maximum, because we're just incrementally changing around threshold, but it's still going to be pretty hard, because you'll end up, it'll be about half an hour long, and it'll be starting just below threshold and finishing just above it. So
it's got a bit of bite.
It's basically be a nice a nice zone 4 effort throughout, effectively.
A tickler. All right, let's get on with it.
Test number 2 is on the deck. Adam is firing up the computer. Half an hour in terms of the duration of the test. 10 minutes at 265 watts. 10 minutes just on my anaerobic threshold at 275 watts, and then a final 10 minutes above my anaerobic threshold at 285 watts. Adam is also going to be taking my blood lactate as well as measuring the gas exhaled in order to see how my body responds to riding in and around my anaerobic threshold. From that, we're going to be able to derive the training zones and power zones to take me through to the Mallorca 312.
Happy to have got it done, and Adam tells me we got some decent data.
Yeah, so actually this, often when we do, apply theoretical ideas to real world circumstances, things don't work out quite so perfectly. But in this instance, it's actually show really nicely where Phil's threshold is. So
Adam, am I a good lab rat?
Oh yeah, good, nice, repeatable data. Definitely managed to put yourself fully in the bin for those tests. That's what we asked. That people give it their all.
I went to a dark place for that final 10 minutes.
Yeah, I mean it's a hard one, because it's basically a kind of pseudo FTP test, basically. So I was taking lactates from Phil's earlobe whilst he was going. And this is what's come out basically. So 265, which we kind of comfortably thought was going to be under his threshold, and that's come out as being the case. So taking lactates at the 4 minute, the 8 minute, and 10 minute mark of these 10 minute steps, his lactate is elevated. He's working hard. He's got a considerable.
So the lactate is 3.9 through 3.8.
Yeah. So
what does that mean in terms of those numbers of 3.9 through 3.8?
So actually generally, 4 millimolar is often taken as being a bit of a
4 millimoles
of blood lactate is taken as being usually quite a good benchmark of kind of threshold, a kind of a population level. So this has actually worked out really nicely in terms of the numbers.
Okay, so I'm a good barometer of the general population. I am Mr. Average.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, without going too deep into this, is one of the issues with applying population level kind of training zones and things onto individual data. This is where the idea of FTP generally is all right, but at an individual level, it's very hard to say actually how accurate it is.
Adam, I'm going to give you the opportunity to tell us what you think about the 20-minute FTP test. Don't hold back.
Issue with 20-minute FTP test is 20 minutes doesn't really mean anything physiologically to everyone. It means a different thing to each person's physiology. What it's really trying to look at is what we're trying to look at here. It's the threshold between effectively the heavy and the severe intensity domain. So a domain, exercise intensities where you can maintain a steady state. So in this instance, you can see it here, we've got blood lactates are elevated. There's a large amount of anaerobic metabolism going on in the muscles, but you've got sufficient aerobic capacity to basically recover that, to recycle the byproducts that are being
Yeah, I'm able to
generated.
clear the waste. I'm able to recycle the energy systems.
Yeah, that's shown in the data we got from the ventilatory stuff as well, from the heart rate as well. So below this threshold, your heart rate's elevated, your VO2's elevated, you're utilising more oxygen, and you'd expect things like your muscle pH to have dropped a little bit, but they stay at a steady state. You maintain basically metabolic homeostasis. Above this threshold, that's not possible.
Let's have a look. So we get to 275 power.
yeah.
So what's happening there?
So basically 275, so within about 4 minutes, so this is why we kind of give it a bit of time.
So 4 minutes into 275.
Yeah.
And we didn't have a break between the 10-minute efforts. You go straight from 265 into 275 to 285.
Yeah, so that's why I've kind of done them as longer steps, as 10-minute steps, and taken the first one at 4 minutes. So you see it's jumped up a little bit from the end of 265 to 275, but we're still, still waiting for Phil's, physiology to adjust to that extra power.
I've got to say, it did feel hard at 275.
Yeah, and what's happened here is his lactate has then just continued to rise within this time frame. That suggests there's not being a steady state. In this instance, I mean, it's gone up to 7.5 by 8 minutes.
Yeah, you can see I'm no longer at steady state. So I've gone up from 3.8 to 4.3 after 4 minutes, 7.5 after 8 minutes, and at the end of the 275 segment, I'm in 8.1, and is 8.1 quite a lot of lactate?
Oh, that's pretty high. Yeah, you're working. There's a very large proportion coming from anaerobic.
Am I still clearing there, or
Well, so you're clearing some of it at the maximal rate your body's able to clear it, but actually the accumulation is greater than the clearance in this instance.
Right.
That's why.
So I'm starting to get overwhelmed, is what you're saying. It's like, the enemy is well and truly at the gates at this stage.
And we're looking at lactate in this instance, but the same thing was being I was seeing with the heart rate, which is continuing drifted up, whereas before it was elevated, but it's at a plateau in the 265. The VO2 was continuing to go up and up and up. And actually something called the respiratory exchange ratio, which is one of the metrics we can get from the ventilatory data, was showing basically that you were above a sustainable aerobic effort. You were utilising a tangible proportion of anaerobic metabolism that wasn't being recovered.
So basically the difference between 265 watts and 275, we go from like DEFCON 5 to about DEFCON 3, which brings us on to 285 watts.
Yeah, and then 285 just is basically the same thing that was happening at 275, but accelerated because we've jumped up even further. So I mean, this started it started at about 8.1, is then up at 10.2, and then by the end we're at 16, which I think in the last testing you did here, you got up to about 17 at the end of the ramp test. So we're getting on towards kind of maximal lactate kind of accumulating concentration in the blood that suggests you're probably pretty close to exhaustion. You can see that on the bike.
Yeah, it's fair to say DEFCON 1 was reached. In terms of the conclusions regarding my VT1, my VT2, my anaerobic threshold, and sort of training zones, what are the key high-level takeaways? Obviously you're going to have a look at the data in more detail, but what do you think the key high-level takeaways are from this?
Yeah, so we've got your VT1, kind of the threshold, kind of upper threshold of your all-day power, as it were. That came out as 229. Yeah, so that's really useful for kind of So I mean, again, training zone, because there's a level of uncertainty that then it kind of ends up sitting in the middle of zone 2, whereas actually arguably it should be the delineation between zone 2 and zone 3. One is an all-day power. One is then into tempo. But so you can kind of move around your training zones to apply and get a much more kind of certain training response. So if you're doing, you're doing your base miles, try and do them at or just below that power, and try not to go too much further above it, because that will just give you that capacity to do those super long kind of 4 or 5 hour runs.
Yeah, so endurance 229 or below, basically.
Then for threshold, this is where it comes kind of more into race or climbing performance. We're then talking about so it came out as 277, I think, on there. On the test, we've then done it kind of more specifically with a high resolution. Bear in mind this is on slightly fatigued legs, so it might be slightly undercooking a bit. Basically, we can say it's between 265 and 275.
Yeah, I reckon that's about right.
Yeah. So, and again,
based on recent experience out there.
And then you do, you would, as you would naturally you probably adjust it down slightly as you get more tired. If you're in the middle of a long ride, you can adjust on that, but you're starting on a bit more certainty as a good kind of grounding for it.
Stay tuned for our next video, where Adam imparts a few truths
as to the issues relating to the 20-minute FTP test, and I go back to the hurt locker to see if he's correct. Strictly in the interests of science, you'll understand.